All right, howdy, howdy. How is everybody doing today? I'm starting a minute later than normal. Slightly sidetracked. Let me close out all my junk here so it doesn't get in the way. And open up Visual Studio Code and make sure I'm in the right folder. Workshops. Ooh. What is in workshops? There's all sorts of stuff in workshops right now. Do some cleanup real quick. Delete that, Jay. Cool. All right, we'll get started in just a second here. Wait for this to delete. And then we are ready to go. Hopefully everybody had a good Halloween and are crammed full of candy and ready to write some code. Or not full candy, or whatever I guess is your thing of choice. Right, all cleaned up, ready to go. So what are we gonna do today? We are going to make a little application that's gonna look a little bit like, I have it built over here. It's gonna be a little bit like this guy. There's gonna be some more details on here because we're gonna flush it out a little bit as we build it. But we're gonna make an Angular application that's gonna pull a list of items from a little mock database and will give us links to go to details of those items. Tell us which one we clicked on. Right? So kind of like a master detail kind of list. We're gonna make a list of beans. And we're gonna see some details about those beans. We're gonna navigate to them directly. If I change the address, right, it knows how to load up that one. These guys have their own individual addresses now. It'll be pretty fun. We're going to be going over most of what would be covered in the HTTP lesson. I believe that's lesson number 8. It's a fun one. Pulling data from external sources is pretty handy. All right. So let's get this rolling. It would help if I shared my screen and not just staring at me. All right, let me load that up again real quick here. All right, here's what I was showing. Right, simple application. We'll add some more panache to it as we build. I have a list of beans here. And I can click on each one and see details of them. Again, we'll have some more details there, but each one does have its own individual address. And this is pulling from a little mock database, just like it would pull from an external resource somewhere. Right? All right, now that I've shown what we're gonna work on this time, let's actually start working on the other one, so I'm not running. The first thing to do, we'll start Angular in making our project. So as always, I'm going to start off by checking which version of the Angular CLI I have installed. I have version 7. As always, there are some minor differences between 6 and 7. So let's make sure what version you're on. I'm going to do ng new. I'm going to call this app-http. It's a little bit bigger for you guys here too. Here we go. App HTTP. I'm going to do my favorite little optional parameter on here for skip tests. That will skip the .spec.ts files. Angular CLI 7 will ask if I want to add routing. Yes. I'm going to use CSS. What the add routing will do is it pretty much makes me some boilerplate code. It makes an app routing module TS file, pretty empty, but all the necessary components ready to go. It'll also wire that up to the app module, app routing module. Right? So a little bit of extra goodies that it does for us out of the bat, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to, inside of this app HTTP folder, I'm going to make a new file and make my little database file. Bean data.json. Bean data.json. This is going to be my little, I'm going to use JSON server to make this as a little database. Hold some of my information inside of it. Cool. All right. And then let's get some beans. So this is going to be a JSON database, so it's going to have just a listing of JSON objects inside of it. It starts off with one object. I give it the name of some sort of list or collection, beans. That is going to be equal to an array. Right? That array is going to have many bean objects inside of it, and I can decide what I want those to look like here. So I want my guys to have an ID. I'm going to start off at 1. I'll then have a name. And we're going to call this first one green. Green beans. And we're going to add a fun property called tootiness. Green beans have a tootiness of 2. If I save this, it'll format a little bit nicer for me. So I'm going to be a little bit lazy and copy and paste this guy 3 more times. There we go. But then I need to do a little bit of cleanup. I don't want green beans 4 times. So I'm going to do green. We're going to do, what's another type? What's a good bean name? I should Google beans. Types of beans. Types of beans. What do you got here? Okay, we got kidney. Kidney beans are number 2. You're going to have a tootiness of, I don't know, 5. What else we have? Navy. Navy beans. Number 3. Tootiness of 8. Who knows? What is that? Chickpeas? Chickpeas is a type of bean. All right, why not? 4. We're going to have a, we'll go kind of right in the middle. 4 as well. So this is my data now. This is going to pretend to be a little database for me. Right? This data right here. Right? This file is just a JSON object with properties that are an array. And what I can do is I'm going to use my JSON server NPM package that I've already installed. If I didn't have it installed, I could do npm install -g JSON-server. Go ahead and run this now, so there's not going to be too much harm in it. Hopefully. So what this is going to do is if I run this, it will take that file and pretty much turn it into a little mock kind of database backend. So I need to go into my app. I need to make sure I'm in my application wherever I want this file to be. Right? All right. My command is going to be JSON-server. I'm going to do --watch, and then the name of the file, beandata.json. And say, hey, cool, we're ready to go. Hi. It gives me an address too, right? That's pretty cool. So if I go to this address, I get my list of beans. Right? Coincidentally, if I go to /1, it gives me the first one. I go to /2, it gives me number 2. /3, number 3. I'm going to take advantage of that when I display out my items. I can pass some data around. Right? So this spins up kind of like a fake backend system for me. I'm going to be able to request data from this address. I can even see this thing is spitting out what I'm doing. I've hit certain addresses. I've made Git commands against these endpoints. Right? Which is pretty cool. I'm going to keep this terminal window open. I'm going to pop open a new one. In this new one, I need to cd back into my app folder. I'm going to run my Angular application. This is going to build it and run it. So one terminal is running my JSON server. Second terminal is running my Angular server. These are going to be running on 2 different port numbers. The JSON server runs on port 3000. Angular likes to run on port 4200. Those are both running on localhost, slightly different addresses. So, cool. And that popped up on my page. My Angular application is up and running. What I want to do next, I want to make sure these errors go away. Cool. So if I have a core Angular application up and running, and I have a mock JSON database running in the background, I'm going to open up yet a third terminal window and go into my application. I want to make sure I'm in my application folder. I'm going to start making my Angular application. First thing I want to do is I want to generate some sort of a data model, a class. Angular will help me with that. I'm going to do ng generate class bean. Make a bean class. This is going to describe my data. It's going to hold all of my properties. End up with bean ts. I want this to match what was in my database, those JSON objects that I made. This is going to be the companion piece of that data inside of Angular, so they need to match the properties. The closer, the better. So I'm going to have an ID, which is a number. I have a name, which is a string. I have a tootiness, which is also a number. That is my core piece of data from my application. The closer this matches up to my data, the better. ID, name, tootiness. That means when I retrieve that JSON object from my database and bring it into Angular, it'll map up. It'll match up pretty well. I can cast things into this type of class. That means that I also need a service. I have my data, and on top of that is going to sit a service to allow access to this data. Right? My service is going to look probably a slightly different than normal. Let's make that ng generate service. I'm going to call this guy bean-data. I'm going to make a bean data service. Right? I like to name my services after the pieces of data they're working with. So typically I'll just say that word dash data. So I get a bean data service, right? So what I need to do in here is this guy is going to be responsible for reaching out to that JSON server and getting data back in. So it needs to know where that address is. So I'm going to make a property called URL, which is a string, which is going to be equal to the address of that server. Localhost colon 3000. I'm also going to add on /beans. This is the same address as the one that's on my page right now. Localhost 3000 /beans. So if I make a request to this address, it should give me this array of data back. That's my expectation. So this needs a couple pieces to get going. Normally we inject stuff into our components. I need to inject something into this service in order for it to reach out across the internet and grab things. I'm going to add something called a private HTTP, which is an HTTP client. That HTTP client is not going to come from there. If you try to do the default import, it will not work. It's not going to be too happy. What I need to do is I need to import HTTP client from @angular/common/HTTP. and that matches that dependency. I also need to add this into my main app module TS. I need to give my application the ability to use that HTTP module. So I'm going to import HTTP client module from @angular/common/HTTP. I believe that's the right one. Yeah, same place. It's a module, so it needs to go with its module friends, of which there are 2 so far. The browser module, app routing module, and this new HTTP client module. Cool. So I've given my Angular application the ability to work with my HTTP client. So that's a couple of requirements to get that up and running so far. So then let's continue making our data service. So I have a local HTTP client I can now use. So how do I use that? I can do a couple methods. The first one I want to do is I want to make a method called getBeans. Kind of like before when we're making services, I would have a local array and I would make methods to get data out of them. Instead, I'm going to have remote data, but I still need methods to get data out of them. This is going to be an observable type of a bean array. I need to bring in both of these dependencies as well. Import bean. I'm going to import observable from RxJS. This is making asynchronous calls in order to get data back from my system. Okay. So what is this going to do? This is going to say return this.http. I can say this.http because I've made an HTTP variable down here. .get, I'm going to make a GET request. A GET request is a fetch for data. Give me data from this address. What type of data am I going to get? I'm going to get an array of my bean objects. Right? And where am I going to get it from? This.url. Right? It doesn't show me an error now, but later on this would error out. I also need to bring in of component. Right? These two typically go in tandem when I want to work with the RxJS. Observable and of. I'm not calling this one directly, but it is necessary. So getBeans is going to reach out across the HTTP protocol to the address that I specified and give me back a bean array. If I look at my JSON data again, I can see that at this address, I have a bean array. That's kind of almost exactly what Chrome is doing when I hit this page as well. It's making a GET request. I can see that if I drill into the inspector appropriately. Maybe. Preserve. Or not. Is it hiding those? Where is my... Maybe. It's doing something. Oh, there we go. All. All right, yeah. Here's a GET request. I can see some details over here. Here's a GET request. Localhost :3000/beans. What is the response? That array of data. It's probably not showing me it here in this preview, but I do get that data back. Right. A GET request is a fetch for data. So this service then should work. Right? In theory, this should be ready to go. So now that I have my data and I have a service to get that data, I need a display for this data. So I'm going to make a new component, ng generate component. I'm going to make a bean list. Make a bean list. Right? Bean list. I'm going to go into my bean list component TS. and I need to add my service into the constructor. This component needs to reach into that service and get data back out. I'm going to say private bean data service. I always start this first one out lowercase. This is my local variable, which is going to be of a type bean data service, which is capitalized. So I'm calling out to the class bean data service, the one that I made earlier, saying give me a copy of that as bean data service. This is going to have a list of those beans. I'm going to say beans is a bean array. It's going to hold the response of that data for the page to use. Right? Inside the constructor, I'm going to say this.bean data service .get beans. I'm using the RxJS observables, so I need to use the subscribe method. This will subscribe to data as it changes inside of that method. The response needs to be an arrow function. It's going to give me back something called B. I'm going to use B as shorthand for beans. I'm going to say this.beans equals B. So give me back an array of data and push it into my local array. I can then go to my bean list HTML. I'm going to make a UL with list items inside of here. My list items are going to do an asterisk ng4. I'm going to tap into Angular's directive for ng4 and say let bean of beans. Right? I'll pull a single item out of my plural array. I can use double curly brackets to read off of this item. I want to read the name. So I have my component, but right now my page still shows the default Angular page. Still default Angular. I haven't loaded my component onto my pages at all. I have all the default Angular HTML. I'm going to clear that out. I'm going to say app-bean-list, which is the selector for my component. And I can prove that to myself by going to the bean list and have app-bean list. Cool. So it is throwing an error message for some reason. This is telling me this.bean-data-service.getBeans is not a function. Did I misname that somewhere? Bean data service, get beans, it's definitely a function. Did I miss a requirement? No, bean. Do I need HTTP headers? I didn't think I required that, but that was exactly it. Wow. I didn't think that was a requirement. It was grayed out. As well as HTTP client, I need to bring in HTTP headers. I should have known not to try to skip a step to be more efficient. These two requirements of using Angular common HTTP. My application then lights up. Here's my array of beans. Green, kidney, navy, chickpeas. Those are the ones we made earlier. Right, that is my data. Right, that's pretty cool. Those are my beans right there. I pulled them from my database. Right, it's pretty neat. I wonder what happens if I go into, where did my data go? Where did my bean data go? There we go, bean data. I might change one of these names. It could be chickpea instead of chickpeas. Oh, chickpea, right? my data updated. Okay. That is tying to that database. It is tying to that data. Okay. So small little snafu. Forgot HTTP headers in my import and my service. But other than that, pell-mell, we're going. So I have my list of beans. I want to make it so that when I click on each one, I go to a page that spits out all of the information for that specific bean. It's going to show me a bit more data. All right, that's what I want to do next. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my app routing module. I need to now build out my routing. All I have to do is add objects to this routes. I'm going to start out by adding 2 objects. First one gets a path, which is empty. It says redirect to. It's going to go back to my main beans list. And it's going to be path match. Full, not fill. Full. This will make it so that the landing page of my application is my beans component, which I then need to make. Beans. I have a component of bean list component. I should make it so when I land on my page, I defaultly go to /beans, my list of beans. This means I can then add on a data component. So I'm going to generate that down in my terminal. ng generate component bean-detail. I want to make a bean detail component. Bean list and bean detail. I'm going to add this into my router. Path of detail. Detail is going to load up a component of bean detail component. Detail. Bean detail component. And I can import that. That means if I go to /detail, if I can spell it right, I should see, oh, I don't have any outlet for my router. App component HTML gets router outlet. That's where the output of my router goes. That means /detail goes to bean detail works, and no information goes to my list of beans. Right? Router outlet works in tandem with my routes. It loads this component wherever I have specified router outlet. Right on top of router outlet, I want a link. A router link equals empty / home. I'm just going to go back home. This is going to end up looking like home in my list of beans. So if I ever manage to go to a detail page, it's also going to have that home link at the top, and I can go back. It's kind of a basic one-link navigation. I have 2 pages. I just need to go back to the default home page. Okay. Router outlet with the router link. Cool. I'm going to keep this app routing module open. I'm going to go to my bean list. Okay. Not that one. I want the HTML. Bean list HTML. Right after the name of the bean, I want a link. A link. It says details. A link says details. I'm going to click on this, and I want to see all of the information about this bean. Okay. But I need to do something special. I'm going to make a router link. I'm going to make a different type of router link. I'm going to make a router link that takes many parameters. To do that, I wrap the word router link in square brackets and set it equal to something in square brackets. I need to tell this where to go. Go to my detail route and use the property bean.id. This is going to do something pretty cool. This is going to make it when I click on each one, it's going to try, there's no route to that. If I hover over each one, it should tell me what it is. Right? I can see kind of in small at the bottom of the browser, detail/4, detail/3. Right? I don't have to try to do anything funky to craft those addresses. I can tell my router link to use this path and then put this ID at the end of it. So now I need to actually make that path. My detail path does not accept a parameter. And I can make it accept that parameter to match that address by saying detail/:ID. Right? That should make it so when I click on the links, they actually work. They don't do what I want them to do, but they work. And the address will reflect accordingly. /detail/4 /detail/2. Kind of neat. So now I'm sending all of that data. Now it is up to my bean detail. My bean detail needs to figure out how to get that parameter off of the address. Right? So it's going to hold on to that ID, which is going to be a number. It's going to grab that ID off of the address. The constructor is going to bring in a private route, which is part of activated route. Activated route comes from Angular router. It is the route that has been matched. At a system level, it holds on to that information. Once I pull that in, inside of ng on init, I need to add a line of code. I can say this.route.params, the route parameters, subscribe. The subscribe works kind of like the observable subscribe. It's the same general type of system. I'm going to say params, arrow, this.id equals plus params ID. Right? This might look kind of weird. I'll show you why we're going to do that in just a second with this plus sign right there. What I want to do first is actually just get this ID displayed on the page. I can do that with double brackets ID on my detail component. That's going to mean hopefully when I click on any of these guys, it shows their number on the page. I click on 1, I get 1. Click on 2, I get 2. Click on 4, I got 4. It's the item I expected. That's the number that matches from the URL. Right? So I'm putting this plus right here because this is going to be a string. Right? It doesn't know that that's a number in that address. This little plus, we'll do some math real quick and jam it in there as a number. If I don't have that, it'll still work. It's going to try to figure out that that's a number, but the plus sign kind of makes sure it's a number. So if you don't forget it, it's not the end of the world. If you do remember it, awesome. It'll make sure you get a number out of there. Because that'll make sure that if I do something weird like detail/apple, it'll give me back not a number. That is not a number. But if I do detail/1, 2, 3, 4, well, that is a number. It gives it to me. Right? It's a plus. That's what that little magic plus sign does. So cool. This has the ability now to, from my list of data I fetch from the database, make a list of beans, make a detail link, and use the ID of that item we got from the database in there. I'm kind of just flowing data through my application. It doesn't necessarily know what the values are. It just knows how to work with the data. So what I want to do next is I need to be able to get an individual bean. Okay? So I'm going to make a method called getBean. This is in my data service. I can get the whole array of beans, but I want to get just one. Get bean is going to take an ID, which is a number. It's going to return an observable bean, single bean. Right? Observable bean. What I need to do is say return this.http.get bean. Kind of like this get beans, but without the array. I'm going to say this.url plus a slash plus the ID. Colon, that's what I forgot. Right. So the address to get an individual item out of my array, right, is if I go to my address and I say beans/2, that gets me number 2 out. Right? So I need to do the same thing here when I request that information. I need to say go to this address, find whatever's at /beans/2, and give me that object back. Fetch that object from the database. And that's what it should do. It should give that and return it to me. Now that my service is able to get an individual item out, I can do this same kind of construction inside of the bean detail component. I'm going to say private bean data service. It's a type of bean data service. And import that. Say, jam that down to 2 lines. Bean data service. Right? So after I get my parameter, right, I get the number from the address, then I should probably get that item out of the database right after that. Right. It's going to be my next logical step. So I need to change this arrow function a little bit. And replace a set of parentheses with curly brackets. Semicolon. I'm going to kind of clean this up to be what it would look like. Cool. So after I get the parameters, I'm going to put my local ID. Then I'm going to say this.bean.data.service.getBean with this.id. .subscribe. It's going to give me back an item, which I'm going to call a B. I'm going to set this dot something. I need to hold on to that locally. So right below my number, I'm going to say current bean. Okay. This dot current bean equals B. That should, in theory, work. So the number 1, I'm not spitting out any information from me. I'm just getting ID. So I'm going to do a line break. Then I want to do my current bean.name. Let's see if I can get the name of the item I just clicked on. 1, green. 2, kidney. 3, navy. Right, that's there. If I do another line break, I can do current bean.tootiness. I can spell tootiness right. Oh, I guess I can deal with that. Scrunch this over. Ooh, there's one. Right? So I have the ID, I have the name, and the tootiness. 3, navy, 8. Right? 4, chickpea, 4. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do some kind of cosmetic. ID is this. The name is this. Tootiness is that guy. Right? Cool. All right. That seems to work. That's pulling the data out of my database and giving it to me. Address is /detail/3. Load me ID number 3, which is Navy, as a 2Dness of 8. I can go back to my home page, and I can see data here. This works. This is pretty cool. I like this. Right? It's actually kind of fun to play with. Trying to see if I can get it fast enough to not work, but okay. Cool. That worked pretty well. Pull this guy back over, maximize U. Hey. Right. So let's then see what all the pieces we have made and take them apart a little bit and take a look at kind of our journey to get to this point. Right? Because this is kind of mostly a working application. If anybody is working on the final project, which I think is a little task list, and it tells you how to get like the details of an item, it's going to be remarkably similar. Right? We're getting the details of a specific item, and we're pulling that out of the address. All right. So first thing we did, I made a JSON file that's going to pretend to be its own little database. Right? I have a collection of beans. It's an array of objects with an ID, a name, and a 2Dness. I just grabbed 4 objects just to have fun with them. The command to run that was on my first terminal. I go all the way up. I can see all of the addresses I used. Cool. The command was JSON-server --watch to say watch this file, and then name the JSON file I'm working with. That loads that up as JSON data to my browser at the address localhost:3000. It actually has a really cool landing page. It tells me what items I have. It tells me what methods I can use. I can go to this /beans and I can see my data. I know that if I go to an address of /some number, as long as it matches the ID, it'll bring it up. If I give a number it doesn't know, like 222, it gives me nothing. It's empty. There was no object at 222, but there is one at number 1. That JSON server is a pretty quick way to kind of make a fake backend database. I put that on terminal number 1 and ran it. Cool. It's up there looking at me. I should actually see that 222 right here. Hey, cool. Didn't find anything at 222. Right. Went to my second terminal, and I started up my Angular application after I installed it. Right. Typically, that's one of the first things I'll do to get my application up and running, so I can see it, and more importantly, I can see it when I break it. Right? Because if I write bad code, and I'm saving it, and it tries to load up the page, and it doesn't work, I know that what I just did doesn't work. I have a real quick feedback cycle. Right? If I waited after a while of writing stuff to load the page, I might not know which part didn't work anymore. So run your application as soon as you can. I made a bean class that matches the database object. I have an ID, which is a number, a name, which is a string, and a 2Dness, which is a number. Right? That matches my data. I have an ID, which is a number, because it doesn't have quotes, a name, which is a string, because it has quotes, and a 2Dness, which is a number. That's my bean class. This describes my data. The next thing to make is a service. Right? My service. I started out by capturing my URL. This is the URL that JSON service provided me. I make a get method. I have to bring in HTTP client. As soon as I bring in HTTP client, I need to import it. And I also need to bring it into my app module, HTTP client module. If I don't have this guy here, my application will kind of work. It'll give me a blank white page. If I inspect it, it will say HTTP client module is not defined. Right? So without that module, my application will not work. Was it because of that? Yeah, same type of error message. So I need to include that. Save that back. Right? So make sure to include the HTTP client module. Then back in my service, I can import it as well. HTTP client, HTTP headers. I'm going to be working with observables. Said that word way too many times today. Observables. Okay. So I'll bring an observable and of from RxJS. I can make a method called getBeans, which returns me an observable array of beans. I use my HTTP client module to make a GET request against my URL, and it gets me an array of these objects and returns them. The handshake part of that comes in my bean list component, which injects my data service into my component, subscribes to the data that it gets, and takes the data and stores it in a local array. Once I have that data in a local array, I can display it on the page. I can use my Angular ng4 directive and do kind of a little for type of thing. Right? I can take a single item out of my plural item. Give me a single bean out of my beans array and display its name. Right? I also added a router link to link to the /detail page with the ID of that object. And we can see that in work. Right? All right, get rid of that console. Right? As soon as I hover over one of these items, it'll say /detail/1, /detail/2. Can you see the addresses change? And get those specific addresses out. After that, I need to make my router. I configure my router for my paths. I need to have a default path. This is going to redirect to my beans path. That path will load the bean list component. It's my main landing page. You go to the raw address and you'll land on the bean component. I then have a detail path. The detail path takes a :ID, which is a placeholder for a parameter, and it loads up the bean detail component. That means my address can be detail/2, and I'll get the number 2. I can then work with that. So when I click on bean number 2, it says load detail number 2. I have number 2. Right? I can work with that. I go into my bean detail TypeScript, and I need to do some work in here too. The first thing to do is grab that number from the URL. That means I need to hold on to it, so I'm going to make a local property for an ID, which is a number. I bring in activated route. Right? Activated route is the route from the router that was activated. Pretty straightforward. It gives me information about that address. I need to subscribe to its parameters because its parameters can change. The address can change. And I take that ID and I stash a copy of it. I use the plus sign to make sure it's a number. I'm going to try to do some math on that. Right? That gets me the number from the address. After I get the number from the address, I need to then pull it from the service. Just like my list, I inject the service into my constructor. But the place where I want to call it is right after I get this ID. As soon as I pull the ID from the address, I should go ahead and pull that item up. So I need to make a getBean method in my service that takes an ID and gets that one for me. So back in my service, I have a getBean method that takes a parameter for an ID. It's almost the same as my array one, except it's singular. I don't have an array anymore. I have a single item I'm pulling out. I take the address, put a slash on the end, and put the ID there as well. My back-end server kind of works like my front-end routing. It kind of matches up a little bit. And I stash that in a property called current bean. Current bean. Right? I can go to the HTML here and I can see my object properties getting spit out. And I can see that work. Right? Here's my bean names, the details next to each one. If I click on the second one, I go to details/2. I see the ID is 2, the name is kidney, 2'ness is 5. Right? That works. That data flow works pretty well. Right? And it's kind of separating out some responsibility for my application. Right? At this point, I have a couple things. My service is responsible for just reaching out to a known address and getting information back to me. Right? I don't necessarily need to know where this is. I need to specify where it is, but this address could change. Maybe this was like my own website, like mco.com. Not amco, that's the thing. mn.com/API/beans or something. As long as the address actually returns the data I'm expecting, I can use whatever address I'm expecting. I'm using the Json server plugin, and it runs at localhost :3000. Okay. And that will give me back an array or a singular item off the address. Okay. That means I can build locally, I can deploy a back-end system and a front-end system, and as long as I have the address, they'll handshake data. My components then become maybe a little bit dumber, right? All this bean list component knows is that it's going to get a list of beans. And I've already told it what that bean should look like, right? It could be 1 bean, it could be 3,000 beans, it could be no beans. This component will behave exactly the same. Its job is to take that array and put it on the page, right? And it provides a link to that item, right? That means the data in here could be really strange. Maybe the first one had ID 9999, right? Which is kind of weird. But everything will still work, right? It still has ID 9999 and it still pulls it up, right? It has no knowledge of the data, it just uses it correctly. Right? Same thing with my detail. My detail doesn't know much information about the exact contents of the array of the beans, but it knows how to take an ID from the URL and request to get that one back. If it can't find it, right? What if I do bean number 5? There's no bean number 5. Right? There's nothing. I don't have any information. It doesn't know where bean 2 is. And it knows where bean 9999 is. Right? And my router kicks in and it just navigates between my components. So building out an application in tiers like that and using our HTTP components allows us to separate out what's in charge of what. Our Angular becomes more of a presentation layer on top of our system. It's our front end of our system. And our back end of our system kind of lives behind the scenes. And as long as they speak the same language and describe the same data, the data flows through and it works. Which is kind of cool. So cool. That's my project. I will have this up. I'm going to put this up on GitHub right now. I'll show you guys how to do that again. I like doing that with classes. So to be safe, I'm going to close all of my terminals to make sure nothing is running. I'm going to go into my app folder. And then I'm going to go to github.com. I'm going to go to my GitHub page. I'm going to make a new repository called app HTTP. Call it the same name. Why not? app HTTP. Create repository. There's any other options. Gives me an address, I can copy it. Well, then, coincidentally, these are the general instructions I want to follow, with some minor differences. So from here, from my application, right, Angular has already made a .git folder for this project. I can already see there's a master branch, but it's not linked up to anything external. It's just a local repository. Right. So the first thing I want to do is I want to check in all of my changes. I'm going to check those into my local repository, and then I'm going to synchronize that with my GitHub repository. Personally, I like using the command line. It makes me feel more legit, I guess. So the command to run is git add dot. That will stage all of my files. See this little icon flash real quick, right? And I'll see a listing of all of my files. I then need to, after I add my changes, I commit my changes. I'm going to say git commit -m. The -m parameter is short for message. I'm going to commit my changes with a message. What did I do? Had workshop made code. Cool. I committed that. And it tells me all of the files that I've committed. As soon as that happened, the number next to my source control icon went away. I've checked in all of my code to my local repository. Now I need to take that local repository and connect it to my GitHub repository. I do that through saying git remote add origin. I can paste that address in that I got before. Right? So I'm adding a remote origin. I'm linking both of these two repositories together. I'm saying my local repository can synchronize to my GitHub repository. Right? Sadly, this command does not give me any response. The best way to make sure this works is by running git remote -v. This views my remote repositories. It's saying, hey, that address is there. If you get that kind of response, awesome, it worked. What do we do next? I want to say git push -u origin master. That's going to go through and tell me it's going through enumerating objects, calculating deltas, pushing stuff, all sorts of cool looking stuff. Right? This matches up fairly close, but not exactly how it says to start. I don't need to initialize it. I did add, but I just did dot. A dot is a wildcard for all of my files. I committed the changes. I added the remote origin. Then I ran git push origin master. That means it all worked well, and I refresh this page. Boop, there's my code. There's all of the stuff we just made. Right? There's my beandata.json. Here's my comments. Right? Here's the default README page that Angular creates. Right? If I go in here, I can see some of my services and all of my code. So cool. That means from here on out, I can make changes to my files and check them into my GitHub project. I don't lose any code anymore, which is pretty handy. All just a couple commands. Because Angular is nice enough to make a project for us and make a local Git repository. There's also a git ignore folder too, file. And this ignores all of the common Angular stuff that should not go up to our project, including the Dode modules folder, which you should never check in to any sort of source control because it's gigantic. So cool. That's our Angular HTTP project. That covers kind of a majority of the functional code from lesson, I said that was 8, lesson 7, lesson 8. One of those two lessons, whichever lesson off the top of my head is the HTTP lesson. Right, my page is timed out, so I can't see it right in front of me. Actually, I can. I wrote it down. Lesson 8, HTTP. Cool. This should be extremely helpful with the final project for passing a parameter around, potentially for loading data. And as well, always a good refresher on how to push code up to GitHub. All right, so for anybody that's live watching me now, if you have any questions or concerns or comments or feedback, have at it. Now is the time. I'll answer any questions at all if I know the answer. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to look confused and just stare up into space.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Regarding the observable of, did you have to add it implicitly in your get method in the service?
Yeah. So in here, I have my get methods.
Right, and let's say in the line 13, next to the return, do you have to specify the of?
Which part?
Of and then.
So for here, I don't have to specify the of. I actually do need to include it in the top, just like I needed to include HTTP headers. The HTTP client actually does use it and return that of, so it needs a reference to it. If I call the of directly, so if I do of like that, I break it horrifically. The HTTP client here is already doing that for me.
Okay.
Right? So it is part of the Angular framework, so it does know how to do that by itself.
Okay.
So you do need to include it. It is going to use it. If you don't include it, it's not going to work. Right? So you always bring in observable and of. Whether or not you use one or the other, always bring both of them in, just in case.
Okay. Thank you.
Just like HTTP client and HTTP headers, I didn't have HTTP headers at first, and everything kind of broke. So bringing it in, even though it doesn't look like it uses it, some of the framework still uses components. So yeah, a minor bit of a difference there. You can kind of think that like the this.http just replaces that of one framework instead of the other.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Cool. Any other questions? All right. In that case then, I will upload this as soon as it finishes compiling and recording out of Zoom. I'll throw it on our Vimeo channel. It's going to be in the workshop channel and the Angular Workshops album. And I think the Workshops album goes into a couple places. And then tomorrow is going to be another workshop on, wow, I don't even know anymore. Where is my Zoom? Where's my calendar list? Tomorrow, what did I say? Angular, putting it all together. Well, that was descriptive. So tomorrow we're going to have a workshop for Angular, putting it all together. We're going to kind of take all of the pieces and make a project. It may or may not be similar to our final project. It might be remarkably close. So if anybody's kind of gets stuck with that, then watch the workshop. It'll get you past any hurdles that you might get stuck on. So cool. So next workshop, kind of piecing it all together and talking about kind of Angular as a whole and making a project. And we'll run that tomorrow, same time, 2 p.m. All right, everybody have a happy day. A happy post-Halloween. Everybody survived. Awesome. Now we'll talk to everybody tomorrow.